Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
The ongoing crisis at the Public Investment Corporation has moved far beyond the suspension of one executive, with senior board resignations, regulatory scrutiny and a new board now in prospect. I think the deeper question now is whether South Africa's public institutions are designed to withstand political pressure and leadership conflict. Someone who's applied her mind to that is Phami Natasan, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Institute of Directors South Africa. Phami, welcome. Is the PIC then and the crisis a failure of particular individuals, do you think, or of a broader system used to appoint and oversee them?
Jeremy, I think it's difficult to say. There are so many complex issues in the PIC, and literally every day when we open the news, we're reading something else. But definitely one of the issues that I've honed in on is around appointment of boards. And there's also been a lot of debate around appointment specifically of the chairperson of this board, of such a large public interest organization. Who should be the chairperson in order to give the public confidence that this board is actually acting in the best interest of this organization? And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the best interest of government or of the political party that they're affiliated to, or even of the person who appointed them. And that's the key distinction for me around on the one hand, independence, which is so critical for a board chair, and then on the second hand, competence, which is the other critical thing we need to look at when it comes to board appointments in the public sector.
What process then should have been undertaken to make sure the chairperson was the right one at the get-go?
I think it's very important that we start having set down actual criteria that the public and everyone involved are aware of. So what is the criteria against which you are measuring individuals before appointing them? And secondly, who is doing the appointments? Because typically your shareholders are responsible for appointing your directors. But in the public sector, as we know, the shareholder is a sole shareholder, which is government, represented by one individual, which is a minister. So is it just a minister's choice by him or herself? Or should there be some sort of an independent nominations panel really assessing and interviewing these candidates to understand whether they have, on the one side, the independence necessary, and on the other side, the director competencies. You know, we always say directorship is a very critical and important role, and it requires its own level of competencies. That means that by virtue of being a politician, let's say, it doesn't necessarily mean you also have the competencies to serve as a director. An individual may have it, but has it been tested, and who has it been tested by before appointments are made?
Effectively, I think what you're saying is that a serving deputy finance minister should never be chairing the board of an institution such as the PIC.
I think from an independence perspective, that's where we talk about sort of someone having unfettered discretion and there being no undue influence or bias in their decision making, etc. Now, even if an individual, let's say a deputy minister, were to say categorically, no, I know I act independently and I'm not influenced by others, etc. That's one thing. That's perhaps actual independence may be argued, but the missing piece is perceived independence. So what do we as the public see as a requirement for an independent chair of a board? Certainly not, I believe, one of the ministers appointed by political affiliations.
Phami, if you can maybe telescope back slightly, what do you think a properly functioning board should have done before this dispute became a public institutional collapse as we're witnessing right now?
That's quite difficult to say because we're reading so many different things and different perspectives on what's happened at the PIC, in terms of, so for example, in this instance around whistleblower complaints, etc., board has no action but to act on those things. And I think a lot of it has to do with perhaps, there's certain things you have to do, but perhaps the way in which it's being done and taking sort of the public along with you. And one may argue, well, what's happening in that organization is that board's business. However, with the PIC being such a public interest organization and with the impact it has, perhaps, more explanation in terms of why things were done and the need for those things.
And in this case, no smoke without fire. So the board suspended the CEO, directors resigned, the regulator intervened. That would obviously, on the surface at least, appear to be evidence of independence or governance failure.
Certainly looks like it. It's always difficult to say whether, trouble within corporates necessarily is governance failure. It's always difficult to make that link. However, seeing what we're seeing and reading what's available in the public, it seems like there's definitely a governance crisis in the organization with so many board members resigning, including the chair. And one of the things we also pick up in the public sector is this pattern of a whole board suddenly being replaced by a whole new board. So you don't really have staggered rotation, which is actually the ideal situation, right? So have some individuals who have served for a long time who understand the entity as you introduce new people who are getting to know the entity and bringing in new ideas and new thoughts. In the public sector, I often see a whole board resigns or is removed, and then there's a whole new board to take over, and that also is not ideal.
Because that has an impact on institutional memory, for instance.
Absolutely. So you want a balance between institutional knowledge, which the longer serving directors bring, and on the other hand, fresh and new ideas and new thinking of how to take this organization forward, which new board members would then have. So it's ideal to have a balance of the two.
Which does raise the awkward question, how will we know whether the new board, when it's appointed, represents genuine reform rather than just another cosmetic reset?
It's so difficult to know because, as I say, there's no transparency around the criteria being used to fill these positions. And this is not a PIC issue alone. This is generally on many boards, and especially in the public sector. We have director competencies which we clearly use to assess people against when we, for example, award them our director designations. And these competencies are the things that should be tested before appointments are made. So now a new board will come in, but who knows what criteria was used to assess their effectiveness.
Aside from that competencies list, and this is a final question to you, is there a single safeguard then that would make the next board less vulnerable, say, to political interference?
A single safeguard, maybe not. It would be ideal if these board members, the new board was appointed with a bit more of an independent panel assessing them rather than just a single individual making an appointment, because I think that alone creates the perception of political affiliation.
Paminata-san, thank you very much indeed, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Directors South Africa.